Hello everybody and welcome to the first episode of a new series I want to make called Honkai Star Rail Character Theories. This first video I want to talk about a character I thought up of that would be able to buff Erudition characters, and mainly follow-up attacks. I feel like it is a common consensus that the Erudition path is one of the weaker paths in the game. These characters focus on dealing AoE damage that hits all enemies equally. This could have been a unique characteristic to these characters, but so many others have blast damage, which does big damage to the main target and does good splash damage to any enemies on the side. Blast damage is perfect for the game since you could focus on the boss enemies that have the most health while also taking out any extra enemies on the side. Comparing that to a lot of Erudition characters that deal an equal amount of damage to all enemies, spreading the damage out equally is not nearly as effective as blast damage is. This is part of the reason why a 4-star character like Qinshui is actually really good. She has good damage multipliers that affect a blast attack that can chunk away bosses and elites and still do damage to all enemies equally with her ultimate. This is part of the reason why Qinshui is considered to be better than 5-star Erudition characters like Himiko and Mid-Yuan. This really sucks though, because if you have these characters by pulling on their banner or getting them as your first 5-star character like I did, then you are kind of stuck with these underperforming characters that should be good considering their rarity. I want these characters to be good, and considering that Hoyoverse hardly ever buffs characters, I think having a support character that can buff follow-up attacks can be a great indirect buff for these characters. The follow-up attacks of these characters are integral to how they work, and they can be the saving grace for them if they are buffed. In this video, I will describe a kit for a character that can make these characters more viable. To start off, this character will be a harmony character since its primary purpose is to support its teammates. It would also be nice for it to be a physical character. I say these two things because Bronya is the only 5-star harmony character at the moment, and she must be getting lonely. Also, physical is a type that hasn't been used yet for a harmony character. Plus, of all the 5-star characters that have come from the premium banner, there hasn't been a single physical element yet, so I think it would be really cool to see. Moving on to the character's build, their basic attack will be the standard amount of any character, not much to say about that. But the skill would mark an enemy and increase the damage of the next 3 follow-up attacks that the team performs to that enemy by 25% at level 1 and up to 50% at level 10. The ultimate will increase the attack of all characters by 33% at level 1 and then by 55% at level 10, and then immediately trigger all characters' follow-up attacks, prioritizing the marked enemy and consuming any charges of these follow-up attacks for these characters. And finally, their talent would increase the team's crit damage by 8% at level 1 and up to 16% at level 10 whenever a follow-up attack is triggered. The buff will last for 2 turns and can stack up to 2 times. I feel like this is a good foundation for the character that demonstrates how it can buff Erudition units but also buff other units as well. Erudition units are not the only characters that have follow-up attacks after all. Kafka and Yangjing both have a follow-up attack that targets a single enemy that had been attacked before. These can add to the talent and give the team a bonus crit damage buff, and can be targeted with the skill, so that way when the ultimate activates their follow-up attacks, it hits the enemy you want without hitting a random enemy instead. Clara and March 7th also have a counter that works as a follow-up attack that can add to the character's talent and be targeted by the skill. To better describe the ultimate when I say it consumes the charges of a character's follow-up attacks, what I mean is the charges used by Himiko, Mid-Yuan, and Blade before they get to use their follow-up attacks. I wanted to make the ultimate the follow-up attack trigger because you can use an ultimate at any time, meaning you can use characters' follow-up attacks at any time. This can lead to interesting strategies that I'll use the Mid-Yuan's Lightning Lord to explain. Even when the Lightning Lord has enough stacks to kill the enemies present, it won't always trigger when you want it to, and can sometimes waste an entire turn in Memory of Chaos. The ultimate can be used to trigger it immediately so that way you don't waste any turns waiting for it. Another way the ultimate can be used is to basically duplicate follow-up attacks. It would be more beneficial to use the ultimate after a follow-up attack if used by Himiko or Blade, in order to not waste the current charge built up by these characters and to do even more damage. I also feel like Blade doesn't really need a buff to his follow-up attack, which is why the ultimate increases attack percentage and not damage, since Blade scales off of HP. Now, after describing the base kit for the character, it's time to discuss the traces. These are just as important as the base kit and really complete the character. The first trace is that the character's basic attack is now considered a follow-up attack. This will help the character keep their talent up, but you need to be smart when using it since it can take one of the 3 uses his skill creates. But it also means that it can use his super powerful basic attack when he uses his ultimate, since it is now a follow-up attack. The second trace is the most important, because it cures a single debuff on the team when using their ultimate. This is mainly to get rid of any debuffs that can immobilize a character, like freeze, imprisonment, and domination, that would stop a character from using their follow-up attack. However, it doesn't dispel traps like Svarog's hand or Fantilia's flower trap thing. The third trace is pretty self-explanatory. The character regens 3 energy every time a follow-up attack is triggered. This synergizes well with the first trace that makes his basic attack a follow-up attack. Because of this, I don't know how much energy the ultimate should consume, but I think it should be pretty high, around 140. The last thing to cover is the Eidolon's and signature light cone. I don't really think it's worth pulling for these with any character, but the character wouldn't be complete if I didn't include them. The first Eidolon makes the basic attack not take away a charge from the character's skill. This one is pretty self-explanatory. The second Eidolon increases the crit damage gained by the trait for each stack and increases the number of stacks by 1. This is effectively an extra 12% crit damage buff for the team. The third and fifth Eidolons are the same as all characters. The fourth Eidolon buffs the speed of all characters by 12% for 2 turns. And the final sixth Eidolon makes it so the ultimate no longer consumes the charges for allies' follow-up attacks, including their own charges created by the skill that buff the damage of follow-up attacks. This one is pretty great for being even more skill point efficient and making them easier to play. The signature light cone would increase the character's effect resistance and defense by 24% at Superimpose 1 and 48% at Superimpose 5. It would also increase the speed of all characters by 6% at Superimpose 1 and up to 12% at Superimpose 5. I wanted to give this character a lot of defensive stats, more specifically effect resistance, so that way they won't get stunned so they can use their ultimate. So now that I've described how the character works, it's time to describe how I think people would end up using him. I can see this character getting the most mileage out of teams that have 2 main DPS and a sustained character, with this character filling in the supportive role. I always like teams that have 2 main DPS, and I feel like with how the ultimate will trigger any follow-up attack from any character, then the more the merrier. Himiko and Midyuan are the 2 most obvious picks for the team, but it might be hard to balance the 2 characters' follow-up attacks to get the most mileage out of them. And people might not even have one of these characters, which is why someone like Herta can be a fine choice to replace one or the other. She's a character that everyone has due to the simulated universe rewards, and Herta buffs her own crit rate the more she uses her follow-up attack, which pairs well with the increased crit damage that the new character would provide to the team. Blade is also a good choice because he also has a similar crit rate increase due to his best relic set that buffs crit rate when taking damage. This means that even though he doesn't benefit as much as the other characters mentioned because he scales off health, he can still benefit though from being on the team. Overall, I think this character is pretty balanced but is still fun. I think it won't be useful in all areas of the game and might not be that viable as more traditional supports, but it will still be a fun character that can enhance certain characters and create a whole new playstyle focusing entirely on follow-up attacks. Let me know in the comments whether you think this character is overpowered, underpowered, or how you would change them. And if you also think it would be fun to have a character that can enable follow-up attacks.